1942, a young woman named Sophie Scholl is walking the sidewalks in Munich, Germany. She's facing the same ideology, y'all. In fact, it's interesting. 1942 is when Margaret Sanger changes the name of her organization from the American Birth Control League to Planned Parenthood, because she was trying to deflect criticism from her involvement in the eugenics movement, because everyone freaking knew that Margaret Sanger, like, if you go back and you're like a ADHD nerd like me and you go back and you read the articles in the journals from 1920, 1921, 1922, and you read the publications and you read the writings and you read the books, everyone knew that Margaret Sanger and her organization, the American Birth Control League, was for eugenics goals. Actually, I'll prove it to you. She once said, birth control without, she once said, eugenics without birth control is a house built upon the sands. It is at the mercy of the rising streams of the unfit. So she once said, I'm a eugenicist, but eugenics without the birth control element is a house built on sands. It won't be successful. So she was openly admitting, I'm trying to usher in a eugenics movement. Everyone knew this. And so after Hitler gave the phrase eugenics a little bit of a negative connotation, by 1942, Sanger, listen to me, guys, the founder of Planned Parenthood, in order to deflect criticism from her involvement in the eugenics movement, changes the name of her organization in 1942 from the American Birth Control League to Planned Parenthood. That same year, a 21-year-old named Sophie is walking the sidewalks of Munich, Germany. She was a believer. She was a Christian. She loved the Lord. She had dreams of becoming a school teacher. She was a student at the University of Munich. Her father had spent some time in prison for publicly criticizing Hitler. So she came from good stock. She came from a good family heritage of Christian resistance. She once said, "We are Christian and we are German. Therefore, we are responsible for Germany." You know what they call that today in America, guys? Christian nationalism.
Yes, they do.
Which is a made-up term by the left to smear Christians who love Jesus, but they also want to protect and guard their country and its laws to make sure that it protects children, the family, marriage, and the social fabric. And if you want to prioritize American interests and laws and ideas first because it's your land and it's where you live, you're a Christian nationalist. And that's the real threat to freedom and democracy, they tell us. Not secular globalism, Christian nationalism. Okay, yeah. Anyways, and so she's recognizing what we're recognizing, right, guys? It's like, we are Christian and we are American. Therefore, we're responsible. Actually, we have more stewardship for how this experiment turns out than those who are not believers. And so she becomes horrified at what's happening. She was a German nationalist, meaning she wanted to prioritize her country's laws and interests first. There's nothing wrong with that. Love of country is an extension of filial piety. So you love your family because they're your family, which means you probably love your neighborhood and you want a safe and good neighborhood because it's where your house is, and your house is where your family lives. And so you probably want good city government and maybe a good mayor and city council and school board members, because your city is where your neighborhood is, and your neighborhood is where your house is, and your house is where your family and children live. And you probably want a good city in order to raise which means you probably want to care about the state laws that you live in the state, and being able to craft different state laws than New York, because your state is where your city is, your city's where your neighborhood is, your neighbor's where your house is, and your house is where your family and children live. There's nothing wrong with being a nationalist. That doesn't mean you've prostituted your faith. It just means I'm a Christian first, but I'm also an American. That's part of my identity. And I want good laws and ideas that control the direction of the country. She was a German nationalist, but she was a Christian. And she was horrified at the eugenics that was taking place in the murder of Jews. And she finds this paper on the sidewalk in Munich in 1942. and it said leaflets of the white rose. And she becomes horrified, guys. And she's reading this, and it's explicitly condemning the crimes of the Nazis. I mean, like calling out Hitler by name, calling him like rude names and stuff. Not very civil and Christian. It breaks the 11th commandment of be nice. And so her heart is stirred to action. She wants to join the White Rose Resistance. Come to find out, she's reading this, and I've read the biography by her sister, and so like I've been in her head and her family's head, like of where they were at, and you know what she's thinking? She's thinking, this sounds a lot like my brother Hans. My brother Hans talks like this at dinner all the time. It sounds like one of his righteous rants against what's happening in Germany. Well, come to find out, the White Rose Resistance had not only been co-founded, it was being run by none other than her older brother Hans, a 24-year-old young man, 24 years old, who just wanted to protect his little sister. you guys, I told you 1942. So the Jews had been wearing the yellow star for over 2.5 years. They were already being rounded up and killed. Germans who opposed what was happening, political dissidents, were already being rounded up and killed. This is a pretty late hour of World War II, 1942. But she demands to join the White Rose Resistance. And Sophie becomes the youngest member and the only woman of the White Rose Resistance. And for the rest of 1942, they would stay up late writing, printing, and distributing anti-Nazi leaflets all around Germany. And they would take trains in the middle of the night to major German cities and do leaflet drops. And so, guys, it was a social media campaign pre-digital age.
Yeah.
It was Ephesians 5:11. Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. They were trying to prick the collective conscience of the people and awaken the church to action.
Mm.
And so in 1943, they took things to the next level. And on February 18th, 1943, Hans and Sophie, so 81 years ago last month, Hans and Sophie, brother and sister, walked onto the campus at the University of Munich. Now, if you're not a history buff and you're listening to this, you have to understand that the colleges, like the clergy, had largely been co-opted into silence or subservience to the Nazi state. This was a dangerous thing to do, is my point.
Yeah.
And so while class was in session and the halls were quiet, they walked onto campus with a suitcase full of their illegal White Rose leaflets, and they started distributing them all throughout the university. And I just stood in the foyer of the University of Munich in the atrium in December because we're coming out with a movie called The 1916 Project soon, and we'll be premiering it all around the country.
Amazing.
And it tells the hidden history of the secular moral revolution and how we got here. And so we
Wow.
were filming there, and then in this iconic scene, Sophie walks 3 stories up to the 3rd floor balcony of the University of Munich, and she starts throwing hundreds of leaflets 3 floors down to the atrium below. The janitor, a Nazi, catches her in the act, calls the Gestapo on the spot, and Hans and Sophie are arrested in moments on February 18th, 1943. They spend 4 days in prison, being brutally interrogated and physically abused, and they refuse to rat out any of their other friends or members of the White Rose Resistance. Unfortunately, there was a leaflet in Hans's pocket, and it matched the handwriting of another one that they had, and so they were able to arrest their friend Christoph Probst, I think a 26-year-old, whose wife was in the hospital recovering from childbirth for a daughter that he would never get to meet or hold. And so these 3 kids in their 20s spend 4 days in prison, and on February 22nd, 1943, they're taken to the guillotine. To have their heads chopped off. And in those 4 days, Sophie would speak what I believe is some of the most prophetic, moving, and disturbing truths that a 21-year-old should not have the maturity to see or to express. And I believe the Lord met her in that cell room. And her cellmate survived the war. And so thanks to her cellmate, guys, who wrote letters to Hans and Sophie's parents months later about every final moment of their daughter's life. We know what she was thinking and saying in those 4 days. And so I think Sophie was asking what we're asking today as we start to land the plane, which is, what the hell is going on?
Exactly.
How did this happen to my country? How did evil become escalated, normalized, and celebrated so quickly? And most importantly, where is the church? And so I want Sophie to speak prophetically to you now, listener. Here's a 21-year-old in a prison cell right before she has her head chopped off. And here's what I think. Here's where I think her head was at. Here's what she was thinking. She said, the real damage is caused by all of those millions out there who just want to survive. It's the honest men and women who just want to be left in peace. Those who don't want their little lives disturbed by anything bigger than themselves. Those with no sides and no causes. Those who won't take measure of their own strength for fear of antagonizing their own weaknesses. Those who don't like to make waves or enemies. Those for whom freedom, honor, truth, and principle, it's just literature. It's just words. Those who live small, die small. It's the reductionistic approach to life. Because if you keep it small, Christian, you'll keep it under control. If you don't make any noise, the boogeyman won't find you. But it's all an illusion. It's all an illusion because they die too. Those
Mm.
people who roll up their spirits into tiny little balls so as to be safe. Safe, said Sophie. Safe. From what? Life is always on the edge of death because narrow streets lead to the same place as wide avenues. And a little candle burns itself out just like the flaming torch does. But I choose my own way to burn. So, who talks like that at 21? That sounds like Chesterton or Winston Churchill or C.S. Lewis. That's a young woman with the lion of the tribe of Judah roaring inside of her. That to say, get off the bench, get onto the field of battle for your king, and watch how I'll move through my blood-bought bride, because obedience is better than sacrifice. Her final words, according to the executioner, who was later interviewed, Sophie's final words were, "The sun still shines." And Hans's final words, like William Wallace, was, "Freedom, freedom." The prison guards were so disturbed by these brother and sister duo, guys, that they let them meet with their parents in a side room right before being taken to the chopping block. And Sophie's mother looked her doomed daughter in the eyes and said, "Remember Jesus, Sophie." And Sophie told her mother, "Yes, but you too, Mama, you too." And that was it. And that was the end of the White Rose Resistance. They found the rest of their friends over the next 9 months and they killed them all. And so I'm here on this show with you this morning to say, while rose blossoms may perish in the fall, they reappear in the spring. And while all of the members of the White Rose Resistance were found and executed, their sacrifice planted the good seeds of resistance in the hearts of millions, whose actions will keep alive the legacy of the White Rose. And your sacrifice, Christian, in these evil, evil days, if you act, if you'll get off the bench, if you'll be obedient, will water those seeds of resistance. So one day, maybe thousands will be awakened. Thousands will be stirred to action. The White Rose will blossom again. And we can say, like Sophie, the sun still shines, spelled S-O-N. This is the invitation. We've been missing out on the greatest adventure, which was not to be invited to have dinner with Trump. It was not to be invited to be retweeted by Elon Musk. It was not to keep our 501c3 statuses. It was to be obedient. Because when we're obedient to the calling we have, we find that God moves. You know, he could have ended slavery, the Holocaust, and abortion. For some reason, those atrocities continued for a long, long time. Why? Why? I don't know. Seemingly, God chooses to wait for his people to get up and move. And then he works through their actions. He chooses to use broken, fallen vessels to accomplish for him what he could do with the stroke of his hand. He chooses to use us. That's actually the greatest adventure. It's when you stand against this culture of death. You say, don't mess with our kids. You say, sit down, you pedophilic, demoniac, infested evils. It's time for the church to rise again. And then God starts blessing that obedience and we start winning victories for our king. What's going to be our story at the marriage supper of the Lamb? Is it going to be, well, I offered up the next generation on a silver platter to the diddle the kids, if you can abort them in the womb, revolutionaries, so I could keep my cush lifestyle? Or is it going to be, I don't freaking care anymore. I'm going to get my
Exactly.
hands dirty. I'm going to get involved. And when God moves, we're just going to give him more glory. We're going to sing a few more worship songs, and we're going to be about our Father's high kingdom business. That's our
Wow.
calling. That's the invitation. And so, listen, we may still be in the minority. Who knows? I don't know about the silent majority. If we are in the minority, you know what? One man plus God equals a majority. And if
Come
you ever
on.
read the story of Gideon's army, sometimes God works miracles through a dedicated set of radicals who are sold out to him.
That's
And
right.
here will be my last statement. That's how we got in this position, was radicals on the other
Come
side
on.
who were in the minority. They were not in the majority. Sanger did not represent the broad worldview of the American culture and republic in the early 1900s. But Sanger and John Money and Alfred Kinsey and all of the sexual revolutionaries that have architected this culture of death were radically devoted revolutionary minorities who played the long game and have created this culture that we're now like, oh my gosh, what is going on? We can flip the script with a radical, devoted minority of believers who sold out for Jesus in the public square might give God a reason to show America mercy. And that's why we're the fastest growing pro-life organization in America. We are trying to put ourselves out of a job to reawaken the church in America to do what she should have always been doing in the first place.